Welcome to The Bitter Witness.
Don't be scared.
Hello. Welcome back. I'm Rebecca, and I'm your host for The Bitter Witness. I hope you've had a good couple of weeks. I, as usual, have been busy at the theater working on the next production. We're only a few weeks out from opening, so the stress levels are starting to rise a bit, but I'm loving every minute of it. It was starting to get a little cooler out there, which I absolutely love, but I'm still in my flip-flops and still have the AC on from time to time. I hope you had a good spooky season. We had a wonderful evening on Halloween. This year, some of my neighbors and myself all congregated in one driveway, and so when the kids came up, they got 5 or 6 handfuls of candy. I was going to take my cauldron full of candy over, but it was too heavy to carry over to my neighbor's house, so the cauldron unfortunately did not come out this year. And yes, I have a Civil War cauldron that I picked up in Maryland on the Antietam battlefield. It's beautiful outside today in my little corner of Ontario. Nice and warm, perfect weather for shorts and flip-flops. This time of year is my favorite. The warm fall sun that you get and the nice, crisp, but still not too cold breeze that hits you from the side. Love it. That's about all that's happening in my little corner of Ontario. Let's get the business out of the way. If you enjoy this episode or any episode, like, rate, and share the show with everyone you know, or don't know for that matter. You can support the show with just a few cents a day over on Patreon or on Spotify. The link for Patreon will be in the show notes. I've been trying to set up a bitters fund on my website, but I'm having some issues getting that done. I'm not that good with computers and all that fancy-fangled electronic shit, so I am working on it, which will make it much easier for people to support the show. Well, that's enough of the business. Let's get to this week's episode. This week, I've chosen a huge case, and it's actually taken me the full 2 weeks since our last episode to research this one. Every time I thought I was finished, I would find more information on it, and it just kept coming and coming. But I finally put an end to writing for this episode. The dogs are sleeping Miley is sleeping right beside me, so you will definitely hear her snoring this episode. And Piper is behind me somewhere snoring away. So Puppy ASMR will be brought to you by both Miley and Piper this week. So grab a cup of tea, sit back, relax, and strap in, 'cause this is a big one, while I tell you about the case of the murder of Jeanette DePalma. The murder of 16-year-old Jeanette DePalma in 1972 serves as a haunting reminder of how sensationalized narratives can overshadow the pursuit of justice, and how they did just that during the Satanic Panic. Even today, the echoes of the media fixation on the lurid notion of Jeanette's murder being the result of a satanic or black magic ritual killing can still be heard. The remaining unanswered questions only deepen the mystery and frustration felt by her loved ones and the community as a whole. The lack of transparency from law enforcement, combined with a reluctance to share crucial evidence or engage the public, further complicates the pursuit of justice as potential leads languish in obscurity. When a law enforcement agency fails to solve a case in over 5 decades, it signals a pressing need for a reevaluation of methods and a willingness to embrace new strategies. Stagnation in solving the case raises serious questions about what information remains buried in the prosecutor's office and what might be lurking in those unexamined files. Are there deeper motives at play, perhaps rooted in a cover-up? With most key figures from that time having passed, it's perplexing to consider how the investigation could still be stymied. Could there be a connection between the murderer and the local law enforcement that has led to this lack of transparency? The narrative of Jeanette's murder has evolved over the years, oscillating between the terrifying possibility of a ritualistic killing, the obsession of an individual who targeted her specifically, or merely the cruel randomness of fate that resulted in her being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ultimately, what persists is the painful acknowledgement that a beautiful young life was snatched away, leaving a gaping void in the hearts of her family and friends. The haunting silence of 51 years has not dulled the pain, but rather amplified the secrecy surrounding her case. The community continues to grapple with unanswered questions, and as time progresses, the hope for closure fades. It is a tragedy that justice has remained out of reach for so long. But the commitment to uncover the truth must endure, for the sake of Jeanette's memory and for all those affected by her enduring legacy. As always, I want to give the victims in the case top billing. Jeanette, and to all those who love and miss her, I acknowledge you and send my love to you wherever you may be. Before we get into this case too far, we need to address, I guess we could call it a theme or a recurring occurrence. It seems to run throughout this case, and that is rumors. Rumors are rampant within the facts of this case. At times, I found polar opposite accounts of the exact same incident. It was incredible, which is one of the main reasons that this episode is a week late getting out. Personally, I think what has happened in this case is a compilation of a number of things. The first is that this case is now 50 years old, and time is a pretty good eraser of the past. People pass on, memories fade or become jumbled as time passes. The second is what I'm going to call the telephone effect. We all remember the game telephone, right? You sit in a circle and someone whispers a sentence to the person next to them, and then that person has to whisper what they heard to the person next to them, and so on, until the sentence makes its way back to the first person again. And then you compare with how the sentence was changed as it went around the circle. I think that is what has happened in this case. Something that someone says gets repeated, but maybe just a little adjustment of the wording, and then the next person alters a word or two, and so on, and so on. The third thing that I think has happened in this case is that the media back in the 1970s took a lot of literary liberties in an effort to sell papers. The old saying that comes to mind here is, "If it bleeds, it leads." The media at the time reported a lot of sensationalized facts regarding Jeanette's murder. So keep that in mind as we go through this case. Jeanette Christine DePalma was born August 3rd, 1956. Jeanette grew up in a large Italian family, one of 5 daughters and 3 brothers of Salvatore and Florence DePalma. The family has been described as a devout Christian family, and Jeanette was known by friends to be devoted to her faith. Her family's home was on Clearview Road in the hilly upper-middle-class neighborhood of Springfield, New Jersey. According to an article, on a clear day, you could see the Manhattan skyline from where the family lived. But I also found it listed that the family was described as weird by neighbors and that they were a tough family. Some people who were interviewed for numerous articles suggested that Salvatore had a connection to the mafia and that the DePalmas didn't really go out that much, in fact barely ever, and that they kept to themselves. I think that this is just the first of many facts that we will hear polar opposites of descriptions of things. But I think it was more of a case of Springfield being a smaller town. Within a small community like this, when a person or a family tends to stick to themselves, people tend to make up stories about what they think goes on inside the house, especially when it's a larger and louder Italian family. In all of my research over the past 2 weeks, I have found no evidence of Salvatore DePalma having any ties to the mafia. I tend to lean towards that they were a devout Christian family, because it is fact that the family went to church several times throughout the week. And Jeanette also worked as an outreach counselor of sorts for the church for teens that were having drug issues. She wasn't a drug counselor per se, but she would answer a phone line for teens having drug issues, and she would be their first point of contact, I believe. Something along the lines of, "Hey, I understand. Come on in. We love you. Let us help you. We'll find some options for you." That sort of thing. In one article that I found, it stated that there were only 3 sisters still living in the DePalma house at the time of Jeanette's disappearance and murder. So I assume that the other 5 children had grown and moved out or were away at school or doing whatever, but there were only 5 people inside the DePalma house at the time of Jeanette's murder. On August 7th, 1972, just 4 days after her 16th birthday, according to Jeanette's friend, Gail Donahue, Jeanette was supposed to be coming over to her house that day. Gail lived about 8 miles away from Jeanette. According to Gail, the two talked on the phone early in the day, and the plan for the day was that Jeanette was going to come over to Gail's house because the 2 girls had made plans with 2 boys for the day. 2 boys that they sort of had interest in. Gail states that when the girls were on the phone, Jeanette told her that she couldn't come because her mom had chores for her to do that day. And Gail, as any true bestie would do, wasn't taking Jeanette's excuse and told her, "You're not leaving me with these 2 guys by myself, so you figure out a way to get your ass over here like you said you would." According to Gail, Jeanette told her, "Okay, I'll talk to my mom and I'll hitchhike over to your house." Jeanette's sister Cindy tells a version of the story that's just a little bit different than Gail's. On that day, Cindy stated that Jeanette came to her and asked her to do the walk over to a boy's house named Tommy, and Tommy lived close to Gail. But Gail stated that that is not the case. Jeanette was only going to her house, and she states that her and Jeanette did know a boy named Tommy who lived near Gail, but it was actually Gail who was interested in Tommy. Jeanette then asked her other sister if she wanted to walk with her, and that sister said no as well. So no matter which story is true, neither of Jeanette's sisters wanted to walk with her that day, and Jeanette had to start out on her own on foot to head over to Gail's house. Now, in order for Jeanette to get over to Gail's house, she would have to walk 3 miles to the train station, and then she would hop on a train and take it the rest of the way, the 5 miles that were remaining. I found a report that stated that Jeanette's mother would normally drive her to the train station, and then Jeanette would jump out and get on a train and go wherever she was off to. According to everything I've read, Jeanette tells her mom on August 7th that because it was nice out, Jeanette was going to walk to the station. I found another report that described the conversation between Jeanette and her mom as not as nice as what it sounded like in the first report. It was more like Jeanette's mom told Jeanette, "I'm driving you to the train station," and Jeanette said, "I'm old enough to walk by myself." And it's described as an argument between the two, and it's probably just a 16-year-old saying, "Hey, Mom, I'm an adult. I'm fine to walk. I don't need you to baby me. I'm heading out." My guess is her mom had a feeling that she knew she was supposed to drive her, but as what usually happens when moms and teenage girls argue, the mom usually, most of the time, would just give up out of pure frustration and say, "Fine, walk," because I know I've done it. I don't have a daughter, but I've done it with my boys. I wouldn't put too much weight into this being a huge argument or anything like that. I put it down as a stupid spat between a mom and a daughter. It's also been reported that Jeanette was a bit of a hard-headed girl. In fact, I've seen a couple of reports describing the entire family as stubborn, stuck in their ways. If you know anything about large Italian families, I can just imagine how tough they all had to be in that family and how loud that house probably was on the regular. So I would take that with a grain of salt as well. Jeanette starts out a 3-mile walk to the train station, and this would have taken her between 45 minutes and an hour to do. Jeanette was seen walking to the train station not too far from her home, crossing the intersection of High Point Drive and Summit Road. But that would be the last sighting of her until her body was found almost 6 weeks later. We know that she was on the walk to the train station, but there are no eyewitnesses that saw her at the train station, so technically, we don't know if she ever even made it there. According to Jeanette's friends, Jeanette was known to hitchhike often, and Jeanette did tell Gail that she was going to hitch a ride over to her house. But her friends state that Jeanette would never get into a car while hitchhiking unless she knew who the person was that was driving the car. Which, if you think about, is a really funny thing to say about hitchhiking, because the whole premise of hitchhiking is stick your thumb out and you take a ride as soon as it's offered, whether you know the person or not. But what I think these friends are saying is that Springfield being a small town, I think what it means is that Jeanette would recognize a car. Maybe not know the person personally driving, but would recognize whose car that was or recognize the driver from somewhere in town. Maybe church, maybe a store, maybe it's an older kid driving the car that stopped to pick her up, and she knows she's seen them around her high school. I think it's that type of thing. And don't forget, this case took place in 1972, and at that time, hitchhiking wasn't seen as something as dangerous as it is today, and it was quite normal for girls and guys to hitchhike for a ride to get where they wanted to go. So most likely, Jeanette wouldn't think twice about thumbing a ride while walking down the road. On August 7th, 1972, Jeanette was supposed to work later in the afternoon, early evening, and she was supposed to go to work after she was done being at Gail's house. But Jeanette never showed up for her shift, and her parents became immediately concerned, and her mother, Florence, started calling friends, but no one had heard from her that day. So her parents called the police to report Jeanette missing. But sadly and frustratingly, as it seems to be the status quo in many of these cases, when the DePalmas called the police station to report their daughter missing, they were told that Jeanette had to be gone for 24 hours before they could report her as missing. I cannot tell you how much this pisses me off every single time I hear that this happened. I know this happened over 50 years ago, but even then, it just blows my mind that police, and keep in mind, most of the officers who would tell this statement, they have to be gone for 24 hours, to frantic parents, were probably parents themselves. The lack of empathy just astounds me. Spend a little time writing the report and send out the information. And if you find the kid, that's fucking wonderful and the case is closed. Who did that hurt? No one except your writing hand. Tangent over, returning to the story. My apologies. Instead of reporting her missing, her parents reported her as a runaway. Now, this decision of reporting her as a runaway has had its consequences for the DePalmas, both within the media and the community, and even some armchair detectives. There's a camp of people that say that because they reported her as a runaway, that means that her parents had something to do with her death or know something about her death. As in, Jeanette OD'd at the house, and they were in some way responsible for moving her body up to the devil's teeth and staged it to look the way that it did. There's another camp of people that believe that her parents were just worried sick about their daughter and thought, well, since we can't report her as missing, let's at least report her as a runaway, and then at the very least they will have her name and description out with the police, and they might be able to locate her, even though they won't be actively looking for her. Basically, it's the best we've got at this point until we can report her as officially missing. Personally, I'm of the later camp. If a parent is worried about their kid, they will use every loophole and resource available to them to find their kid. At least I know I would. Another story that I read, and I don't know how much truth is into this, is that the fight that was reported between Jeanette and her mother on August 7th was not actually about her mom driving her to the train station, but it was about a cousin of Jeanette's. Apparently, Jeanette had a cousin who was prone to running away. And on the morning of August 7th, her cousin had run away again and had been gone for a little bit longer than what they would normally be gone for when they ran away. According to this story, Jeanette's parents told her about her cousin on August 7th, and Jeanette was angry that they waited so long to tell her. And so because of this story, this took me on another deep Reddit dive. The rumors started coming to the surface that because Jeanette was angry about not being informed of her cousin being gone, Jeanette then herself decided to run away. But there's a hitch in that story, I would call it, because Jeanette DePalma left her house with nothing. She took her purse and her wallet and walked out the door. If she was planning on running away, she would have taken at least some clothing or toiletries or something with her, and she didn't. And even if she ran away because she was angry about receiving the news of her cousin later than she would have liked, she probably would have cooled off eventually and come home. Then, on September 19th, 1972, Springfield officer Don Schrute, 44 years old, is responding to a call. He is sent to the Gardens apartment complex in Springfield, New Jersey. The complex superintendent had called 911 and reported that they had found a severed human arm lying in the grass right by one of the several entrances to the complex. The Gardens apartment complex was not unknown to Officer Schrute, nor was the superintendent unknown to the police of Springfield. The superintendent of the building had made several calls to the police as there was a group of asshole teenagers who lived inside this complex. And basically these boys were little shit snakes. And they had made it their purpose in life to make a target out of this superintendent. And they would pull stupid pranks on her, which in turn would cause the super to call the cops. They were literally just little dickbags. This poor woman, the super, was the victim of several of these shit snakes pranks over the years. One of the favorites of these little shit snakes was to cut open the garbage bags and strew the garbage all over the lawn. And then this poor woman would have to clean it all up as she was the super and responsible for keeping the complex looking nice. Because of these shit snakes, Officer Don was expecting the arm to just be another one of their pranks, and he figured he would have to give them a good scare. Because honestly, Officer Dawn and the rest of the police department were getting quite sick and tired of responding to calls to the complex because of these little assholes. But when Officer Dawn arrived at the complex, he exited his cruiser and started to make his way towards the building, looking for the super. Even before he reached the building, he saw the item in question. Officer Dawn stated that he immediately knew that it was the forearm of a human and not some punk prank. He stated that he could see the fingernails and he could tell that the forearm had been weathered from the elements. He stated that the flesh had a leathery appearance and was maroon in color. Dawn took a few pictures of the forearm exactly where it was in situ and then called it into the station, asking for some detectives to come out to the complex. So, how did this arm get there? Well, some say that they feel a dog brought the arm to the complex. There was a Dalmatian dog that was owned by someone who lived inside the complex, and according to reports, this Dalmatian would wander around the area loose, exploring. It could have been this Dalmatian. It could have also been these assholes who like to play pranks on the super, and they found it and decided to scare the shit out of her really good this time. I couldn't find anywhere that the police explained definitively how the arm got there, but for the most part, it's a general consensus that either this Dalmatian or a different dog brought this arm into the complex. So Officer Dawn has called for backup, and of course the detectives arrive, and so do other officers. And while all the officers are standing around while the detectives are doing their thing with this arm, one of the officers states to Officer Dawn, I wonder if this could be Jeanette DePalma's arm. At the time that this arm was found, Jeanette was the only person that had been reported missing in Springfield. So it stands to reason that someone would make the connection. The arm had fingernail polish on, and so the detectives made the presumption that the arm was that of a girl. But as we all know now, and especially in the 70s, when glam rock was hitting the scene, boys wore nail polish back then. Think Ziggy Stardust. The police immediately organized a search to find the rest of the body, and the Springfield police, because it was so small, had to call in another police force from a neighboring town to come in and help search for the body. Springfield also didn't have a canine unit, so they had to call a team in with a bloodhound. About 4 or 5 officers from other towns, most of which were off duty at the time, volunteered to come and help search. The search started around 3 p.m. the day the arm was discovered. At around 3:30 p.m., the search team entered a wooded area off of Mountain View Road. The search team went up a hill, over a creek, and when they came out the other side of the creek, they came upon a quarry owned by Haldale Construction Materials Company. It has been stated by law enforcement that the quarry would not be accessible by any normal means of traffic. And those are the words they use. So basically they're saying this quarry is really deep inside the woods. It's not something that hikers would come up upon while they were out for just a leisurely hike. Someone would have to know where this quarry is in order to get there. Did you hear that? Banjos. If you know, you know. They found what looked like the top portion of an arm. They stated they felt that this piece must have fallen off probably when the dog was on their travels. Next, the search team started traversing a very steep hill, and at the very top there was a flat area, and this area was known as the Devil's Skull back in the 20s. Apparently, some local kids found a depression in the natural blue stone that was on top of this cliff, and it was sort of like a hollowed area in the rock, and in the spring and summer, the depression would fill up with water and local kids would sit inside of it, kind of like a little hot tub. Then in the autumn, the area would get really dreary, rainy, and gray, and maybe a little downtrodden, kind of like Ontario when the sun stops coming around to our side of the planet. According to local folklore, at this dreary time in the fall, you could see buzzards circling above the cliff top because rodents and small animals would fall into the water and drown. But during the summer, when the hollow dried out, it looked like a skull. Then the construction materials company bought the land and began mining the area, and they started disposing waste rock along the edge of the devil's skull. And that waste rock started looking like rows of teeth. And that was when the area gained the name the Devil's Teeth. At the top of this hill, they found the body of a young girl missing an arm. The body was lying face down, and the complete area where the body was lying was approximately 12 feet across. The body was wearing a blue t-shirt and tan pants, no shoes or socks, but they did find a pair of flip-flops close to the body. It appeared that animals had eaten most of the flesh off of the head and feet of the body. According to law enforcement, the body was in an advanced state of deterioration. So much so that the clothing on the body had fused to the body. Police officers stated that they only assumed that this person was a female based on nail polish on the fingers. But other than that, they were unable to discern whether the person had been male or female. The body had also started to sink into the ground. All of this meant that this body had been in this spot, exposed to the elements for a long period of time. But because this body was missing an arm, they were fairly certain that the arm at the complex belonged to this body. The arm that was still attached to the body was resting under the head, which at this point was almost skeletonized, but there was still some chunks of long, dark, matted hair attached to the skull. The search team stated that there was a bizarre arrangement of sticks and stones around the body, and it has been reported that the sticks appeared to be in the shape of crosses, and that there were some stones placed in a semicircle around the head of the body. And according to one member of the search team, the stones almost appeared to be in the shape of a halo. While they were at the crime scene, another officer spoke to Officer Dawn and stated that this murder scene looked to be the work of witchcraft. Finally, the detectives caught up to the search team and kicked all of the search team off of the hilltop. They had to wait for the coroner to arrive and officially pronounce the body as dead. When they were removing the body, the hill that this cliff top was on was so steep that they had to bring in a fire truck and use the ladder to go up one side of the cliff face and bring the body down on the ladder. Now they have retrieved the body from the cliff top and brought it back to the coroner's office. Mainly because of the deteriorized state of the remains, the coroner was unable to determine a cause of death. The coroner stated that the suspected cause of death was strangulation, but there was nothing really in the autopsy that would prove that suspicion, like a crushing injury in the neck area or a broken hyoid bone, nothing like that. There was no obvious blunt force trauma or bullet wounds on the body. If I would have to take a guess, I would say that strangulation or poisoning was probably the best guess a coroner could have made at that moment. While the coroner was trying to determine cause of death on the body, the detectives were trying to figure out the identity of the body. One of the detectives remembered the officer at the scene who said to Officer Dawn, I wonder if this is Jeanette DePalma's body. So that detective decided to start there. The day after the body was found, the detectives had a meeting with Jeanette's dentist. Her dentist attended to the coroner's office and was able to make a definitive ID that the body found at the top of the cliff was that of 16-year-old Jeanette DePalma. Jeanette had been missing for approximately 6 weeks. The magazine Weird New Jersey took on the Jeanette DePalma case and have done amazing work on it. And when the guys from Weird New Jersey first approached the Springfield police about the case, and they had put in their FOIA requests and all of that, and the response from the Springfield police was that all of the files and evidence from the Jeanette DePalma case had been destroyed in a flood. But these guys at Weird New Jersey were not deterred. They went to the prosecutor's office and asked them the same thing. And finally, in 2021, they were able to get possession of the files from there. Everything on the case, which included crime scene photos, and there was some evidence in there, plus all of the police notes. And don't forget, the Springfield police told them that this case file did not exist. It had been destroyed in a flood. Weird New Jersey published the crime scene photos just the way that they received them from the prosecutor's office. And in these crime scene photos, they have blacked out Jeanette's body, which I agree with. No one needs to see her body the way it was. But the way they've blacked it out, you can still see the positioning of the body, the arms, the legs, everything you need to see to assess the crime scene. And that was the prosecutor's office that blacked out the body, not the Weird New Jersey guys. I just want to clarify that. In the crime scene photos, near Jeanette's body, there was a pair of brown sandals. One was just under her feet, and the other was off to the right of the body just a bit. It kind of looks like they came off when she fell, maybe. As well, close to the body, was what appeared to be the contents of a purse or bag of some kind. And it appeared as though the contents had been dumped out in a pile. And within that pile, there was a pack of tissues, a Vicks inhaler, a small compact, lipstick, a blue comb, a key on a ring, and a small eyeshadow box, and a clear vial with an unknown substance resembling a quercetin bottle. Apparently, this is an over-the-counter cold and flu medication. I've never heard of it, so it must be something from the States, perhaps, maybe, or something that was from the 70s. I wasn't even a star in the sky when... Was I a star in the sky? No, I wasn't. No, I was not even a star in the sky when this murder took place. I wasn't born until the next year. I don't think it's that important to figure out what quercetin is. Now, Florence DePalma did tell the press that her daughter had a mild cold, so that clear, unknown liquid probably was that cold and flu medication. But what wasn't present at the crime scene was the purse or the bag itself. And there was no wallet or change purse or money of any kind. And Jeanette would have had money on her to take the train. This area that Jeanette's body was found in is before the train station. As well, also missing from the crime scene, according to Jeanette's family, she always wore a necklace that had a charm of a cross in gold and diamonds on it. That was missing from the body as well. I'm not going to post the crime scene photos because Weird New Jersey has them posted on their website. And if you want to look at them, you're more than welcome to go there and look at them. But obtaining these crime scene photos took these guys a really long time, and they put a lot of work into it, and I don't think that it's fair that someone else publish their work. So if you want to look at the crime scene photos, go to weirdnewjersey.com and you can see them there. after the police figured out that it was Jeanette DePalma that they found, the police went to interview Jeanette's family regarding the last day that they had seen Jeanette. And according to a report that I found, the police felt that the family was being purposely vague with their answers, basically offering 1- and 2-word answers to questions and not really giving law enforcement any usable information about their daughter. And then, 2 days after Jeanette's body was found, Florence DePalma, Jeanette's mom, made a statement to the press that not only caused suspicion to fall upon the whole family by law enforcement, but also the members of their community as well. Florence stated to the Newark Star-Ledger, a local paper, that she had resigned herself to her daughter's death weeks ago. She went on to state that the Lord had told her and had given her peace, that she didn't understand what that meant, but that she trusted in God and that she still had faith. Now, hang on. Before we crucify Florence for this statement, let's unpack it a little bit. When a child is missing, parents tend to lose a little piece of hope every single minute, every single day that their child is gone. I'm not saying they give up hope. They never really give up hope. But the longer a child is missing, the closer a parent comes to believing and accepting that their child is deceased. In my research, I have come across many parents who had missing children, and although they always had a glimmer of hope that their child would be returned to them safe and alive, there comes a point during the weeks and months and years where they resign themselves that there is a great possibility that their child is no longer alive. I'm not saying this happens in every case, and there are some parents who refuse to believe that their missing child is no longer alive. But maybe this is what happened with Florence and Salvatore. Don't forget, the DePalma family was a very religious family, and maybe this is how Florence and Salvatore handled the situation. Maybe they just put their faith in God, and this is what Florence felt that God was telling her. But because of this statement, many in the community and law enforcement thought that perhaps the DePalma family had something to do with Jeanette's disappearance and death. There are reports that stated that the police had been called out to the DePalma home on a few occasions in the past, but from what I found on a deep dive on Reddit, whenever the police would arrive at the house, the police would be told, "Yeah, there was a problem earlier, but it's all good now. Thanks for coming out." In the definitive book on this case, Death on the Devil's Teeth, Gail Donahue, Jeanette's friend, who was supposed to hang out with Jeanette that day, states that her father took her over to the DePalma home after Jeanette had been found. Gail states that she and her father sat in the television room with both Florence and Salvatore. Gail asked the DePalmas, "What happened?" Florence answered, "We are at peace. A couple of weeks ago, God told me that Jeanette would be found to the north of us." Gail states in the book that she was taken aback by the apparent lackadaisical attitude of the two parents whose daughter was just found murdered. Gail actually describes Florence and Salvatore as spaced out. Gail is also quoted in the book as saying that at Jeanette's funeral, the casket was closed and there was a wreath on top of the casket that read, "Sweet 16." Gail states that when she read that on the wreath, she became physically sick to her stomach. She states about the DePalma family, quote, "How cheesy can you be? They made an icon out of Jeanette," unquote. Now, in rebuttal to this, Cindy DePalma, Jeanette's sister, stated that she doesn't remember Gail even attending Jeanette's funeral, and Gail rebuffs this vehemently. There were over 500 people at this funeral, remember? And I seriously doubt that Jeanette's best friend didn't attend the funeral. Maybe, just maybe, Cindy didn't see Gail at the funeral. I believe Gail. I believe Gail was at that funeral. We've talked about the crime scene. Now let's talk about the opinions of the crime scene and the murder. The crime scene has been a topic of much debate in this case because of the presumptions that have been made over the years. Mainly, this debate was caused, and still is to this day, because of the numerous news articles that came out during this period suggesting that Jeanette's death was the result of a witch coven or satanic ritual. There are two specific articles that I could find that I want to talk about that will show you the level of sensationalism and literary liberties that the media took regarding the death of Jeanette. On September 29, 1972, the following article appeared in the Elizabeth Daily Journal with the title, "Girl Sacrificed in Witch Rite?" Investigation into the death of 16-year-old Jeanette DePalma is focusing on elements of black witchcraft and Satan worship. A review of death scene photos, according to reports, is leading authorities to believe the girl's death may have been in the nature of a sacrifice. Pieces of wood, at first thought to be at the scene by chance, are now seen as symbols. One searcher said 2 pieces of wood were crossed on the ground over her head. More wood framed the body like a coffin. Another person who was there said, "I guess if you were looking for signs, they were there." This article added a new level to Jeanette's murder that wasn't necessary and only hindered the investigation. And my opinion? I think that if the media hadn't focused on turning Jeanette's death into some kind of ritual sacrifice, the case might have been solved years and years ago. I absolutely hate when media outlets sensationalize a story just to sell papers or get more clicks. It drives me insane. Not only does it have the capability of causing a widespread moral panic like what we saw with the satanic panic in the 70s and 80s, but it causes parents to focus on wrong things, such as instead of instructing their children to stay away from drugs or strangers, which were the real dangers that were out there in the 70s and 80s, parents were telling their kids that if they weren't good, they would be kidnapped by satanic worshipers or witches and used as a human sacrifice. My God, in the 80s, every person that passed by me on the sidewalk, I was checking them out for red demon eyes or warts on their nose, because that's what I thought witches were when I was a kid. The final thing that really pisses me off about media sensationalism, or in point of fact, just making shit up so it sells, is that the media is supposed to be a responsible outlet for people to become more informed on what is happening in the world. And instead, the media, with stories like this, sentenced not only the Wicca religion, but others to exist with misunderstanding and hatred directed at them, which is not fair and it wasn't right. All right, rant over. Let's dive deeper into this witchcraft Satanism angle. Now, there is a diagram that has been published of the crime scene, and it was drawn by Union County Lieutenant of Investigations, G. Owens. I'll post this diagram on the Facebook page. In the diagram, Jeanette's body is in the center, and there is a notation on the page that states body on stomach, facing right, right arm over the tree limb. Clothing, blue shirt, tan pants, brown sandals near the body. Where the body is positioned, it is surrounded by tree limbs, and the article that we just discussed stated that the way the tree limbs were situated around the body takes on the appearance of a coffin or a trapezoid. It doesn't look that way to me in the photographs Honestly, to me, it just looks like an area of heavily overgrown vegetation, and the tree limbs have more than likely fallen on their own over time. Remember, there was an officer who said to Officer Dawn at the crime scene that it looked like some kind of witchcraft had happened there? Well, he said this because, according to the diagram that's been drawn by G. Owens, sticks on the ground surrounding Jeanette's body were in the form of crucifixes. Again, I don't agree with this. As I said, it just looks like an area of heavily overgrown vegetation. And literally, I think what he saw was what he wanted to see. Remember, this is the beginning of the satanic panic. And Jeanette's case is one of the very first satanic panic murder cases that occurred. Honestly, I think that officer was spooked because of the remoteness of the location, and he made an offhand observation based on his fears and anxiety. And I would put a little money on it that he most likely repeated the observation in conversation to other people. Something like that the crime scene was spooky, looked like crucifixes all over the ground. Probably witchcraft or some shit like that. And I think the media got wind of that and ran with it. So according to the article that I just read you, the police would have us believe that a group of Satanists or witches kidnapped Jeanette, took her all the way up to Devil's Teeth, sacrificed her in an elaborate ceremony, ripped giant tree limbs off of trees and placed them around the body in some kind of ritualistic fashion like a coffin or a trapezoid, and then picked up hundreds of little sticks and placed them around the body in the style of a cross, then found a whole bunch of stones and laid it around the head like a halo, then emptied her purse, stole her money and her necklace, which was a crucifix, and left. I don't think that's exactly how satanic or Wiccan rituals work. And I don't think that Satanists, or Wiccans for that matter, would use crucifixes. But I'm not an expert on either subject, so I could be wrong. But I will say this. Looking at the crime scenes published by Weird New Jersey, I don't know how any police officer would ever think that that crime scene was the site of any kind of ritual. The overgrowth of vegetation makes that just implausible. Jeanette was only missing for 6 weeks. That area was way too overgrown for anything to have happened just 6 weeks prior. And you can see that in the photos. There are no heavily trampled areas around her body. There's no broken sticks or anything like that, just large overgrown vegetation that would have taken way more than 6 weeks to grow. It does not look like an altar of any kind or an area that any kind of religion would hold rituals at. Now, the second article that also helped to fuel the fire of satanic panic is one that is titled, DePalmas Say Slayers Possessed by Demons. This article states that Jeanette's parents, Florence and Salvatore, state that their daughter was killed by people whose bodies were possessed by demons. Authorities said that Jeanette's death could be linked to a coven or witchcraft assembly in the area. The article then goes on to discuss the incidents of animal sacrifice taking place on the Watchung Reservation, which is about a 15-minute drive from Springfield. The article states that the state park police found these acts committed against dogs, cats, and goats. They also found a bowl of blood which contained the bodies of several pigeons that had had their necks snapped. Now, there are a couple things that I found interesting inside this article. The first is that Florence is quoted as saying that when Jeanette accepted Jesus, she stopped using drugs. Now, that could mean a couple of things, and we'll talk about that in a second. The second thing that's interesting, and rather frustrating as well, is that the article tries to link Jeanette's murder to the List family murders. And we're going to talk about that in a second. Florence stating that Jeanette stopped using drugs when she accepted Jesus. I mean, it was the 70s. It was the early 70s, so we're still at the end of the hippie movement. We're at the beginning of glam rock. We're at the beginning of disco. Everybody was smoking pot. I mean, and people were taking LSD and going on trips, and there's no evidence anywhere that Jeanette was on heroin or anything hard. To me, what I saw here and there, little bits, was that Jeanette maybe took a hit of LSD here and there and maybe smoked a joint. You cannot OD on LSD, so we know that wasn't her cause of death. It would take so much marijuana to OD on that I don't think a human could actually ingest that much. According to David Schmader, the author of Weed, the User's Guide, he spoke with experts from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and it would require a human to ingest 1,500 pounds of marijuana in a 15-minute time period to cause death. Dude, I knew some potheads in high school that were chronic, and even they wouldn't be able to take that much. So my guess is Jeanette probably smoked some weed, and her mother knew about it, and she probably stopped smoking. The second, we're going to dive a little deeper into because it's everywhere. Connecting Jeanette's murder to the List family murders. Almost every article I read about Jeanette at some point tries to connect her to the List family murders. For those of you who don't know, John List was a New Jersey father who claimed to be devoutly religious, who less than a year before Jeanette went missing, murdered his 3 children, his wife, and his mother, and then took off. He stated in a letter to his pastor that he did it to save them from the humiliation of his failure as a father, because he had lost his job and couldn't support his family. This shitsnake List went on the run and lived in hiding under a false name until one night in 1989, the TV show America's Most Wanted aired an aged progression clay bust of what List would look like at that time. And one of his neighbors in Richmond, Virginia, recognized the face and called authorities. John List was arrested shortly and remained in jail until his death in 2008. He was a piece of shit. The main reason that Jeanette's case has been linked to the List murders is because there was speculation that one of the List children, the daughter, Patricia, had started showing interest in the occult and in theater. She had started experimenting with LSD and had been smoking pot as well, and List described his daughter as a witch in the letter that he left for his pastor. Patricia had referred to herself as part of a witch coven that practiced Satanism. She had told friends and teachers this, and there were some books on the occult found in the List home once the bodies were discovered. And that's literally all that connects the List case to Jeanette DePalma's murder. There is no direct link or proof that Patricia knew Jeanette, that Patricia's witch coven practiced in Springfield. There's just nothing. It really shouldn't be connected to Jeanette's murder, but it has been. And the most plausible reason I can come up with is because there was a little tiny dollop of witchcraft in the List family murder. And of course, we have the giant poundage of Satanism and witchcraft in Jeanette's murder. Officer Ed Kitch, who was the juvenile officer in Springfield at the time, states that one possibility for the link between Jeanette and the List family murders is that at this time, about once a month, police detectives from Union County would get together and discuss cases they were working on to see if perhaps a criminal had committed crimes in other jurisdictions. According to Ed Kitch, one detective who attended these meetings went to the press in secret and stated that the trees formed a cross at Jeanette's crime scene, and the papers ran with the story from there. Remember, if it bleeds, it leads. The media made the connection between Jeanette and the List murders. Ed Kitch, we're going to call him Officer Ed. Officer Ed states that he didn't see anything that looked like it had been deliberately placed around the body of Jeanette at the crime scene. He stated, quote, "She was found lying in the middle of the woods, for Christ's sake. There were sticks and stones everywhere," unquote. There are other officers who believe that there were in fact crosses surrounding Jeanette and the circle of stones around her head that appeared to create a halo. Those same officers state that Officer Ed was only at the scene of the body for about 5 minutes, and that wasn't long enough for him to notice all the details. Personally, if I was at the scene of a body dump, one of the first things I would look at is the area directly surrounding the body to see if there was anything lying there like a clue, and if there were over a dozen crucifixes made out of sticks, I'm pretty sure I would notice that, because that would be about the time that I would turn and nope the fuck out. I say that Officer Ed would have noticed 20 or 30 small crosses lying around the body. Remember Officer Don, the one who got called out to the discovery of the arm? He also states that he didn't see any crosses and that the vegetation was overgrown around Jeanette's body and that it all seemed to have fallen into place naturally. We also have a cousin of Jeanette's, Elisa Grulich. Lisa has climbed to the exact spot on Devil's Teeth where Jeanette was found several times to pay respect to her cousin. But the first time that Lisa made the climb was on September 21st, 1972, just 2 days after Jeanette was found. Lisa states that police tape was still there hanging from the trees. There was a black imprint of the outline of the body on the ground. She states that there were logs that surrounded the imprint of Jeanette's body. One was horizontal above where Jeanette's head was, and the other horizontal log down under her feet, and there were logs on either side of the imprint of the body. Lisa claims that inside the area between these two logs is where she discovered a number of wooden crosses. She states that they were very tiny and they were covering the entire area around the imprint of Jeanette's body. She states that every cross seemed to have been made by simply laying one stick over another. Here's the thing. I'm not saying that these people didn't see what they say they saw. They probably did see what they think they saw, but it doesn't mean that they were actually crosses. They could very well have just been sticks that fell or stalks of plants that fell and happened to crisscross. Walk through a farmer's field sometime, and if you try, I bet you could find crosses everywhere. The other thing about this is none of these things that people say they saw surrounding Jeanette's body have anything to do with Satanism or witchcraft, black magic, or even Wicca. The only place that I've ever read or seen Satanists committing a ritualistic murder of a human being has been in the movies. And trust me, I've seen some shit over the years. The only thing that I could find about witches practicing ritual murder happened in Africa, which is not what happened up on that cliff. It's not the same witch coven. And if you look at the Wicca religion, there is absolutely nothing about ritual murder. Those who practice Wicca are about respecting the earth and becoming one with the senses, and it's a faith based on respect and love, not violence and murder. The only possible thing up on that cliff that might have anything to do with anything is the shape of a trapezoid, which is what shape the logs were that were surrounding Jeanette's body. And the trapezoid holds some really important meaning in Satanism, specifically LaVey Satanism. But other than that, when was the last time you saw a Satan worshiper want to start making crosses or halos? It doesn't happen. A Dr. Jason Coy, who is a professor of history at the College of Charleston, stated that he feels the murder scene looked more like it had been left by a psychopath with a Christian fixation. He points out that in fictional accounts of satanic rituals, the cross is always inverted. If you look on heavy metal albums from the late 70s and 80s, the crosses are always upside down, but that isn't the case with this scene. And actually, when you boil it down, having crosses around her body, if they were even there, point towards a Christian religion. Orthodox Christianity hold the cross or crucifix as their central symbol. It represents the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, who was the savior of all Christians. And if you want to go one step further, if these crosses were around Jeanette's body, then that would point to a sign or symbol of atonement or reparation for committing a wrong. If I was investigating this case and I thought that I saw crosses surrounding the body, the first place I would look is to those who hold a strong Christian faith. Now calm down. I'm not saying that the family had anything to do with Jeanette's death. I'm simply stating that this is the direction I would investigate. In my honest opinion, there is nothing at this crime scene that suggests a ritual murder or sacrifice. You can clearly see in the crime scene photos on Weird, New Jersey, that Jeanette's body almost appears to be on her side. Her arm is above her head. As far as I know, that is not any kind of ritualistic position to leave a body in. We've pretty much established now that there were no signs at the scene of Satanism, ritual murder, or witchcraft. And honestly, we could go on for hours about this topic alone, but let's not. So now we need to look at some actual suspects. In October of 1972, just 1 month after Jeanette's body was found, Officer Ed received a phone call from 21-year-old Terry Rickle. Terry stated that he had information regarding Jeanette DePalma's murder. The two men made an appointment for Terry to come in and speak with Ed. Terry started the conversation by stating that he didn't know Jeanette, but he had friends that did know her and well. He then informed Ed that he knew who killed Jeanette. Terry, buddy, lead with that. Terry informed Ed that the man who killed Jeanette was known as Red. He was tall and thin with bushy red hair and a beard, and he was in his 30s. According to Terry, Red often worked at the Baltursol, I don't know how to say that, Baltursol Golf Club. I apologize to the golf club. I cannot say your name. Red often worked at the golf club as a caddy. Back in the 70s, a person could walk onto a golf course and sit down in the caddy shack and wait for a player to come along and pick you as a caddy. And after you had caddied for them for the day, they would pay you tips in cash. Terry informed Ed that during the golfing season, Red lived in a hut that he had built in the woods very close to Devil's Teeth, and that once the season was over, Red would go away and live somewhere warm until the next golfing season started. Apparently, Red's hut was close to the Devil's Teeth, and even in October, the golfing season was still going on, and during August and September, the golfing season was going strong. Ed and several other officers thought this was a great lead, and so they headed out in search of Red. They went back to the quarry and started out in the direction of Devil's Teeth. Not long after heading into the woods and into that same direction, the party came upon a shelter made from pieces of scrap metal and tin. The shack was only about 50 yards from where Jeanette's body was found. Inside the dwelling, officers found canned food, a blanket, and cooking pans. Inside one of those pans was some rice that had rotted. Officer Ed states that the appearance of the inside of the shack seemed that the person living there had left in a hurry. According to Officer Ed, Red had left his place during golf season and right after Jeanette was murdered. To you and me, it seems a little odd that Red would leave during golfing season if that's how he makes his money to sustain himself during the winter months. But according to Officer Ed, it wasn't that odd that Red had left quickly. After all, he was living a transient lifestyle. They put out an APB on Red and stated that the police only wanted to speak to him because he was just a person of interest. They wanted to see what he had to offer to the case. According to locals, Red was in his shack and at the golf club every golf season for the entirety of the season, and then he would leave and return the following year. And he had done this for years. So why all of a sudden in the August, September, October range of 1972 does Red break a life pattern? Just seems a little weird to me. The police searched for Red, and eventually, late in the fall of 1972, they were able to locate him. According to Officer Ed, Red was identified as Red Keir. But officer states that he can't remember now if Red was the man's actual first name or just a nickname. But in any event, Red was brought in and interrogated by the Springfield police. Apparently, Red came from a family with money who lived in Georgia. And when Red was brought in and interrogated, he had the family attorney present. No one knows what was said in that interrogation, and all that was ever said to other police officers and the press was that Red had been cleared, and the higher-ups in the department stated that it was because of the differences in age and lifestyles between Red and Jeanette. After that statement, Red left Springfield and never returned. And that was all that was ever said about Red officially. Unofficially, many townsfolk, even now, still think that Red murdered Jeanette. But, of course, those beliefs are without any evidence of any kind. The next suspect that we have to discuss is a man named Tommy Rillo. Tommy was a watchman, sort of security guard for the Hoodale Quarry, which the Devil's Teeth is on the property of. Tommy drove either an open Jeep or a small motorcycle to patrol the grounds of the quarry. Some of the locals described Tommy as weird. Tommy was between 28 and 35 years old, and apparently he had this job because he was friends with some of the men who worked at the quarry. Tommy wasn't actually weird, so to say. He was disabled. One local man, named Peter Hammer, is quoted as saying, "Tommy was handicapped. He was 14 years old, trapped in a 30-year-old man's body. But he was friendly with the police." Officer Ed says of Tommy, quote, "Tommy was a little slow mentally. I don't believe he was impaired, but he was just, that was a good job for him." Unquote. Tommy's job was to watch the equipment and make sure that people who didn't belong at the quarry didn't enter the premises. Tommy would patrol the grounds, and at different spots throughout the property, there would be a key. And when Tommy would arrive to that particular spot, he would put that key into a Detex clock that he carried with him. This would create a printout of the times that Tommy was in that specific spot, and essentially would give the bosses of the quarry proof that Tommy was doing his rounds properly. It also gave Tommy an alibi. Some locals believe that Jeanette may have gone to the quarry to smoke some weed and bumped into Tommy, and this resulted in Tommy killing her and leaving her body up on Devil's Teeth. As well, many have asked how it is that Tommy was this great patrolman at the quarry, but never stumbled onto Jeanette's body. Apparently, at the local high school, when some of the kids wanted to smoke some pot, they would pile into a car and head out to the quarry and go up to Devil's Teeth to partake. They called it a pot run, and it was well known and done by many of the teenagers at the time. But there are two things that put a wrench into the theory that Tommy murdered Jeanette. The first is that the toxicology reports on Jeanette's body showed no alcohol or drugs in her system at all. So if she was up there at Devil's Teeth for a pot run, she didn't partake, and she wasn't around anyone who was partaking. As for Tommy not coming across Jeanette's body at the quarry, Officer Ed states that Tommy was supposed to watch the buildings where the equipment was kept. And in the quarry, those buildings were on the other side of the quarry. Officer Ed states that he doesn't believe there are any buildings in the area of where Devil's Teeth is. So really, Tommy would have no reason to go up there ever on his rounds. Don't forget, there's a printout of exactly where Tommy was at specific times during that night. It couldn't have been Tommy Rillo. The next suspect that we need to discuss is the Springfield Police Force. So it's a suspect, but not a single suspect. It's a group of suspects. Let me explain. The Springfield Police, in fact, had a makeshift firing range up on the property of the quarry. Some locals have speculated that perhaps Jeanette was a victim of a stray bullet. Maybe one or more of the officers were at the firing range and had a bullet go astray, and that struck Jeanette, killing her. So it wasn't a legitimate shooting range. The police would use it if they were training or for target practice. But other people used this range as well, like some gun enthusiasts and the rifle club and that kind of thing. Officer Ed states that it is ridiculous to think that a stray bullet would have hit Jeanette way up on Devil's Teeth, because he says that the area that held the shooting range was on the complete opposite side of the quarry. He states, quote, "If her body was found on the east side of the quarry, then the shooting range would be in the southwest corner," unquote. Our next suspect that is often brought up is the son of the chief of police. From what I found while researching, the boy's name was Gary Parcell, and the Springfield chief of police's name was George Parcell. According to Jeanette's nephew, John Bancy, in an interview with Weird New Jersey magazine, John states that Gary liked his Aunt Jeanette, and she went to go to work that day, and something happened, and she ended up dead. According to John Bancy, Gary took his own life later, but John is quick to state that he has absolutely no evidence for this theory. It's just another rumor that his family had heard about Jeanette's death. What debunks this theory is that George Parcell, the chief of police, had two sons. The first son, Stephen, never spoke with his father, and he's still alive as far as I could tell. And the other son, Gary, apparently lived in California with his mother. That son, Gary, passed away in 2002, not a few days after Jeanette's murder, like what John Bancy suggests. As well, both Stephen and Gary were 7 and 9 years respectively older than Jeanette. There is very little chance that Jeanette and the two Parcell boys would have been running in the same social circles, even if the two boys were living in Springfield at the time of the murder, and I could not find any proof that they were. Now we're going to get to Officer Ed's theory of what happened with Jeanette. And within Officer Ed's theory comes up another suspect. According to Officer Ed, he feels that the key to the mystery of who killed Jeanette is tied up with a red Ford Falcon car. Officer Ed states that on the morning that Jeanette went missing, he was responding to a call at about 6:30 a.m., and for that call, he had to turn onto the same road where the hiking trail up to Devil's Teeth began. When he turned onto the road, he noticed that at the spot where the trail began, there was a red Ford Falcon parked. Ed states that when he saw the car, he thought to himself, "What the hell is that doing there?" And then he continued on to the call that he was responding to. After a short visit to the house where the call was made, Ed returned to town. He then had to drive right past the spot again where the Falcon was parked, less than half an hour earlier. But now the Falcon was gone. Cindy DePalma, Jeanette's sister, stated that a guy who drove a red convertible car used to pick her and Jeanette up when they were hitchhiking, and he liked Jeanette. Cindy stated that this guy, Mike, and she couldn't remember his last name, but Cindy stated that Mike really liked Jeanette, but that Jeanette did not reciprocate the feelings back to Mike. In fact, Cindy stated that the way Mike behaved made Jeanette feel very uncomfortable. Cindy describes this Mike guy as predatory, but she believes that even though Jeanette felt uneasy around this guy, she probably would still take a ride from him, even if she was hitchhiking alone. In 2003, the Weird New Jersey magazine received a letter from a Rose McNaughton, who was a schoolmate of Cindy DePalma's. Rose stated that she knew who Mike was and believed that he was responsible for Jeanette's death. In her letter, Rose states that Mike lived 2 blocks from the last place that Jeanette was seen alive, crossing the intersection of High Point and Summit Roads. Rose said he drove a 1971 Ford Torino 500, was 18 at the time of Jeanette's appearance, and was known for stating he was a warlock. According to Rose, those who practice black magic and Satanism would meet near the Watchung Reservation to hold their meetings or whatever it was that they did. In her letter, Rose states that the moment she knew he had something to do with Jeanette's murder was one day when both she and Mike were hanging out together alone. She stated that they were about to kiss and Mike leaned in but stopped short and indicated the gold and diamond cross that Rose wore around her neck and stated, "I can't come near you with that thing on." Rose states that she immediately knew that he was somehow involved. As well, according to Rose, Mike left Springfield right after Jeanette's body was found. But she also states that Mike's father had died and his mother had sold the house, and the two, Mike and his mother, had moved away together. Okay, pull her back, Rosie girl. Mike saying that he can't kiss you because you're wearing a cross doesn't mean that he killed Jeanette. Really, all it says is that he believes that he is a warlock and that a cross will somehow hurt him or that he doesn't like them. But you need a little more evidence than that to convict someone of kidnapping and murder. And in fact, if that was true about the crucifix and you believe that there were crosses surrounding Jeanette's body, it almost suggests that he didn't have anything to do with it because of his aversion to crucifixes, right? But to me, this sounds like a senior guy who was trying to impress the younger girls and say he was a warlock to try and get into their pants. Not really a killer, and yeah, he might have been spooky or scary, but I tend to believe that that was the vibe he was going for. As for him leaving, it's not that unusual for a wife to sell the house and move away when her husband dies. It's not really like Mike was fleeing Springfield. But then, according to Melissa Benner, a friend of Jeanette's, Mike had tried to rape Melissa during 1972, but Melissa was able to escape. Melissa states that Mike was very aggressive sexually with many of the girls in school, and in fact had sexually assaulted a few of the girls in school. Melissa states that she was scared for Jeanette because Mike had made his desire for Jeanette well known. Basically, he had set a target on Jeanette, and he was starting to close in on her when she disappeared. Now that makes me pause and think. There are so many suspects in this case, it is ridiculous. And a lot of them have only become suspects because of rumors within the town. About 2 years after Jeanette disappeared, a rumor surfaced with some of the kids that went to school with Jeanette. The rumor stated that on the night that Jeanette disappeared, so August 7th, 1972, there was a party being thrown by a friend of Jeanette's named Donna Blattis. And Jeanette was supposed to go to this party. And in actuality, the party was being thrown by Donna and her brothers at their family's home. According to this rumor, Jeanette showed up at this party. According to this rumor, Jeanette OD'd at this party and died. And Donna's brothers, the Blattis brothers, either one or all of them, hauled Jeanette's body up to the Devil's Teeth and dumped her there. But just like most of the other rumors in this case, a lot of people dispute this rumor. Specifically, a good friend of Donna Blattis named Denise Parker. According to Denise, who was also a friend of Jeanette's as well, but a better friend to Donna Blattis, Denise states that there was no party that night at the Blattis house. She says that if there had been a party, she herself would have been aware and would have been at the party. But Denise states that the Blattis house was really not a party house, it was a hangout house, meaning that there were always 2 or 3 kids hanging out there. She says that she heard a rumor that Jeanette was at the Blattis home that night, asking for a ride to get over to Gail's house. But Donna was grounded and couldn't drive her. So Jeanette simply left the Blattis home and continued on her way trying to get to Gail's house. Officer Ed Kitch, who was the juvenile officer during this time, stated that he is 90% certain that something happened to Jeanette that night at the Blattis home, and that Mark Blattis, one of Donna's brothers, had something directly to do with Jeanette's death. There might be some weight to this rumor, and the only reason I say that is because there are a couple of DePalma family members who also believe that this is what happened to their loved one. Specifically, Jeanette's mother and her sister Cindy. According to Florence, Jeanette's mother, she does not remember any of the Blattis family attending the funeral for Jeanette. Now, I don't know if that is the only reason that the members of the DePalma family feel that the Blattis boys held responsibility for Jeanette's death, and I can see how they would think that, it being strange that an entire family of Jeanette's so-called friends avoiding a funeral. But there are tons of reasons why a person wouldn't go to a funeral that I can think of just off the top of my head. The first, and maybe the most obvious, is that Perhaps the DePalma family simply missed seeing members of the Blattis family at the funeral. Jeanette's funeral was attended by over 500 people, and there is a possibility that perhaps the Blattis family members just mixed in with the crowd and the DePalmas don't remember. Another is that maybe the Blattises don't do well with death and funerals. I personally have a couple relatives that don't do well with death and do not attend funerals, no matter who it is in the coffin, even their own parent. A third possibility could have been a religious aspect. We know that the DePalmas were a devout family, but maybe the Blattises were also, but in a different faith from the DePalmas. There are certain religions, like for instance Jehovah's Witness, they're not allowed to attend a ceremony that is conducted within another faith. And then of course we have the fourth reason, which is the Blattises were guilty of something and they had something to do with Jeanette's death. A question arises for me with this theory of the Blattises. If this is true, then where was Jeanette for the rest of the day? She left in the early afternoon to head over to Gale's, and the Blattis party wasn't until the nighttime. So why did Jeanette show up at the Blattises asking for a ride over to Gale's when she was already supposed to be there? The next suspect in our suspect lineup was an accountant named Otto Nilsson. Now this shit rat, Nelson, oh my God. Let's just say that volatile and violent aren't strong enough words to describe this puke. Otto was married with 5 kids, and life seemed to be going okay for the family. But then Otto started drinking, and well, we all know where this can lead to, right? Nothing good. Otto's wife divorced him and took the kids. Otto wasn't happy about it and decided to go and speak with his ex-wife. When he arrived at the house, there was no one there. Otto, assuming his ex-wife was over at one of their neighbors, smashed his way into his neighbor's home and proceeded to physically assault the couple and their 2 teenage sons. Otto was arrested, and when he was at the station, detectives noticed that he bore a striking resemblance to a suspect sketch in another murder of a young girl whose case had similarities to Jeanette's case. That victim's name was Joan Kramer. Detectives started investigating this shit rat for Joan Kramer's death. Because of that initialized investigation into Joan Kramer's death, Otto received a suspended sentence on the assault of the neighbor family. Eventually, Otto was to be charged with Joan Kramer's death and went on trial for it, but he was found not guilty because there was no eyewitness to him abducting Joan. So how does this case connect to Jeanette's? Well, the main thing I found was that both Jeanette and Joan were most likely hitchhiking at the time they disappeared. It's assumed that both girls were strangled. Joan's cause of death was determined, but Jeanette's wasn't. But remember, the coroner did state that in his expert opinion, she was strangled. Otto was living with his mother, which her home was in close proximity to where Jeanette lived. Although prosecutors had tried Otto for Joan's death, they believed wholeheartedly that he was at least responsible for Joan's murder and more than likely was responsible for Jeanette's as well. But because of double jeopardy laws in the States, Otto couldn't be brought to trial on Joan's death again, and law enforcement did not have any evidence that linked him to Jeanette's death. And so, Otto never faced any other legal action in either girl's death. But this wouldn't be the last time that Otto was inside a courtroom. No, my friends. On September 13th, 1976, Otto walked into East Orange Veterans Administration Hospital with a rifle in his hands. He nonchalantly walked through the hospital until he found who he was looking for. He came upon Dr. Florence Rock and Dr. Jean Louis. He forced them into a security closet at gunpoint and barricaded the three of them inside. He then began to rant and rave about a conspiracy that was keeping him from seeing his 5 children who were still living with their mother. 4 hours of hostage negotiations with the FBI, and Otto finally surrendered. At his trial, Otto sent letters to the judge discussing his new diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia and why he thought he did the things he did. In the letter, he literally blames alcohol consumption for his actions, the break and enter and assault on the family, and the hostage situation. He stated that alcohol destroyed the proteins going to his brain, which he accompanied with a diagram of a protein cell being destroyed. According to Otto's letters, alcohol lies dormant in his cells, and when he committed his crimes, the alcohol must have reactivated without his knowledge and caused him to commit his crimes. That could be one of the best excuses I have ever heard in my life. His letters basically then go on to discuss Thorazine, which was the medication that the doctors wanted to prescribe to him for his condition. But he informs the judge of all the pitfalls of the medication and offers ridiculous alternatives to having to take the meds. Even with these wonderfully researched letters to the judge, Otto was found to be legally insane, and he was sentenced to an asylum until a court found him no longer legally insane. Police and many townsfolk really liked Otto for a suspect in Jeanette's death. The last we hear of Otto is that he escaped from the asylum. I couldn't find any death or burial records for him, but I would assume he's probably passed on by now. We have one final suspect that we have to include in this laundry list of possible perpetrators, and that is Richard Cottingham, also known as the Torso Killer. According to some sources, he has confessed to Jeanette DePalma's murder, and the time frame, location, and possibly the MO all kind of fall in line with his other killings that he has been convicted of. But as of yet, the police have not been able to solidly confirm that Cottingham was Jeanette's killer. Personally, I'm not completely sold on Cottingham being the killer with our case, only because of the remoteness of the crime scene. The cliff that is Devil's Teeth is literally in the middle of nowhere. And I think that whoever killed Jeanette was extremely familiar with that quarry. I don't know that Cottingham was all that familiar with this area, as many of his crimes occurred in Nassau County, New York, and Union County, New Jersey is over an hour and a half drive away. As well, we have Jeanette's friend stating emphatically that she wouldn't have gotten into a car unless she knew who the person driving was. So I don't see Jeanette jumping into Cottingham's car if she didn't know him. And then it would have had to have been Jeanette that took him to the Devil's Teeth. And honestly, I just don't see that happening. I'm not ruling him out, but I just don't feel strongly about him being the killer. However, there is a retired detective and a daughter of one of Cottingham's known victims who have been working together, attempting to get Cottingham to actually confess honestly to all of his killings, as well to disclose where some of the bodies are, and they have been successful in obtaining and confirming some of Cottingham's victims. But like I said earlier, the police have not been able to confirm him as Jeanette's killer. Cottingham is currently 76 years old and still in prison. He has been charged and convicted on some of the cases that he's confessed to. And so he will die in jail, which is exactly what he deserves. And I wish the detective and the daughter of his one victim all the luck I can muster. And I hope that they are able to get gobs of useful information that they can out of Cottingham before this shit snake kicks the bucket. Now, that's it for suspects in Jeanette DePalma's murder. Do you have one that you think you like? If you do, email me and let me know, because I'm very curious. We have one more weird little tidbit that doesn't really go anywhere. It's just a weird thing that happened. One of Jeanette's older sisters, her name is Carol, decided later in the 80s to find some therapy for something. She didn't go to the psychiatrist specifically for any trauma from Jeanette's murder. She just wanted to get some therapy. And so she found a psychiatrist and started some sessions. After a few sessions, Carol brought up her sister's murder. The psychiatrist immediately stopped the session, stating that she could no longer treat Carol because she was already treating someone involved in the case. And she told Carol that she had to find another psychiatrist, and that was the end of it. Carol was never able to find out who the involved person was, and that's it. Do you think it could have been Otto in the asylum? Maybe it was one of the police officers who worked the case. Because of patient-doctor confidentiality, we will most likely never know who that psychiatrist was treating. As for Jeanette's family, they hired a private detective to look into Jeanette's murder, but he came up with nothing. He informed the family that his best guess was that there was a cover-up of some sort. The family then hired a second private detective to again look into Jeanette's murder, but this detective had a heart attack and died before he could finish his investigation. Sadly, the only thing that the DePalma family has are memories of Jeanette and the belief that they may never see true justice for Jeanette. And that is the unsolved murder of Jeanette DePalma. My thoughts. This case was huge, and it didn't have to be. I believe that if the media hadn't sensationalized the satanic ritual killing angle, perhaps there would have been more of an investigation. We also have to remember that Jeanette was murdered in the 1970s, so the level of forensic is almost prehistoric when compared to what we have today. But there is hope. There apparently is physical evidence that has been saved. And I believe a relative of Jeanette's, or someone close to this case, did try and go to court to get that evidence tested now. I think it was in 2021 or 2022. But their case was denied. The judge denied their request to have this evidence tested. And I have to tell you, that gives the theory of a police cover-up a whole bunch more weight, in my opinion. I can't imagine what the judge's thought process would be for denying to have evidence processed other than a police cover-up. And the thing is that the judge denying that evidence being processed now makes me think that it was a younger person who committed this crime. If they were a teenager then, they'd only be in their 60s now. Most of the adults that were around when Jeanette was murdered are very old. This was 51 years ago. So someone in their late 30s or 40s would be in their late 80s or 90s now if they're even still alive. There are many questions that arise from Jeanette DePalma's murder. What's inside that case file at the prosecutor's office? You know there's parts of that file they didn't release. Why, over 50 years later, are they still holding on to evidence and not asking for help from the public? You know, if a law enforcement agency hasn't solved a case in 51 years, the method they're using isn't working and they need to switch gears and try something else. My personal opinion of this case, I really like that Mike guy for the murder. He liked Jeanette. He had claimed to dabble in the occult, probably didn't know what the hell he was doing, probably only did it because he thought it made him look cool and mysterious. Jeanette's friend stated that Jeanette would never have gotten into a car unless she knew who the person was. She knew Mike. Even though he creeped her out, she might have thought, well, it's a ride and it's better than hoofing it. I believe that if it was this Mike asshole that murdered Jeanette, it was him and him alone that did it. For the simple reason that they had to bring a fire truck in to remove Jeanette's body from that cliff. I don't see anyone dragging a body up that hill. There's just no way. Honestly, it would have taken 3 or more people to get her body up that steep, steep hill if she was murdered somewhere else. And I just don't see 3 or more shit rats keeping their mouths shut for 51 years. I feel like Jeanette walked up to the devil's teeth. And she wouldn't have walked up there with anyone unless she knew who they were. Now, could she have been taken up there at gunpoint? Absolutely. Sure. But if Jeanette was as tough and hard-headed as what I think she was, I think she would have fought and there would have been signs of that at the crime scene, which there weren't. I really like this 18-year-old Mike guy for this. But that's just my opinion. Whew. That's a hell of a case. And I could have gone on at least 25 more tangents. We could have looked at the Joan Kramer case. We didn't because that could take up another 2 episodes. It's just insane how big Jeanette's case has come. And still, no solution. It's maddening to think that there is evidence sitting there, possibly degrading, and we can't get it tested. We could end this case now by testing that evidence. It's just pathetic. After that long episode, I think we'll leave it there for this week. Thank you for listening. Stay safe. Get your pap tests done. And enjoy your day today. This has been a Bitter Witness production.